Hello and welcome back to Coast FC, the Canadian soccer podcast focused on all things CPL, Canadian Championship, and more. My name is Felipe and Mike.
And I'm Mike Rice.
And we are back for 2025. We had a little bit of a holiday break, then a little extended break on that one because unfortunately I lost my voice and got a bit of a cough and am only just recovering. My voice is pretty much back, but still a little bit there. But we are back for 2025 and we are doing a big recap episode of all of the transfer news and drama that has gone on in the last month or so since we've been away. Obviously, our Christmas/New Year episodes were pre-recorded, so it's been quite a while since we've been able to speak on a lot of the news. And since it is to do with transfer news, squad and roster updates, and all of that kind of drama, who else to invite? Who better than Josh Healey, the Wanderers Notebook, who loves to chat about transfer and loves to break stories and to give us some scoops. So welcome, Josh, to the show. We're happy to have you.
Thanks for having me, guys. Yeah, I joked the other day that most of the time when I'm calling people now, they're asking me to stop bugging them. So that's probably a sign I'm doing things all right. But again, great to be back.
Oh yeah, we love it. We love it. We need somebody in the CPL that's doing the dirty work of getting all of the leaks and the news and the sources to fuel the fires in the off season, or else it gets too boring unless we get a little bit of drama here and there. And I feel like so far we've gotten some drama. We've gotten some drama, some news, some shocks, some returns, and we're gonna go through all of it in this episode. But before we dive into all of it, remember to follow us on all of our socials at Coast to Coast FC, as well as finding us on YouTube under the same name. So let's start with the big boys of the transfer window, and it's the same protagonist that we had last season in the off season. It's the biggest, most successful team of the CPL. It is, of course, Forge FC of Hamilton. They have had a roller coaster of an off season. So I'm just going to go and start to list a couple of things. We'll discuss our opinions, what we think of it, and yeah, we'll go on because there's a lot to talk about with Forge FC. We'll save the biggest one for last because I feel like that's obviously going to be a big discussion. But we'll start with some of the signings that they've made. The biggest ones, obviously, being the return of Mo Babuli to Hamilton. He crossed Derby lines once again. And joining him from York United is, of course, the Players' Player of the Year, Brian Wright, the striker, coming to Forge FC. And of course, Josh, this one might hurt a little bit for you, being, of course, covering the Halifax, but they also have the big signing of Dan Nimick, the defender who has been nominated for Defender of the Year and was Wanderers' top scorer last year as well. I'll start with you, Josh. Obviously, Babuli Wright, big signings. You know, those are the kind of strikers that are going to come and replace the outgoing Terrence Campbell and Jordan Hamilton. But Dan Nimick one, obviously a little bit raw for a lot of people, a little bit more surprising. What have you found the reaction to be from Halifax fans on this signing and the kind of impact that he might have for Forge?
Yeah, well, you can tell it's a good signing by Forge just by the way Halifax fans have turned out and made their displeasure known. You only have to go through One Soccer's feed a little bit to find a compilation they put together of comments ranging from turncoat to enjoy the red cards to whatever else it may be. Having said that, again, I think that's an indication that Halifax is losing a very good player who may have had a troubled second half of the season. But, you know, my expectation is that Forge is going to get the 2023 version of Dan Nimick. You know, the CPL season can be long. It can be grinding. And by the end of last year, you know, Dan didn't quite look himself. There was a couple mistakes that happened. Again, there was a back-to-back red card situation, which are not typical for his, you know, young professional career. So I think with a little bit more leadership on the side of Forge, who have, you know, been there, done that, he won't be as heavily leaned on, in terms of that locker room role. He was one of the vice captains last year. A lot of the time as well, he was the fella who spoke up when things weren't going well for the Wanderers. They were winless in their first 9 matches, for example, last year. He doesn't have to play that role in Hamilton. They've got Kyle Becker, who's a full 10 years older than Dan. They've got a number of guys who have won championships, who have hoisted North Star Cups. And Dan's just going to get to play. And when he gets to do that, when he's out of his own head, I think that's when he excels. And that's what we were able to kind of see at the beginning of 2023 when there was no expectation. And going into Forge here again, I expect that, we're going to see him rebound and make Wanderers fans, kind of rue every time he comes to the Wanderers grounds.
He had a horrible season where I don't think he made dramatically more mistakes last season as he did in his first season, but every time he did, it went terribly. It was really highlighted. It was a red card. It was own goals. Those times last year, maybe a mistake happens, but he's a new player. It was all highlighted so much on him last year, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think it's unfortunate too, because as mentioned, I think he's a fantastic footballer. There was definitely some poor decision making, but also some bad ball luck, and that's not just Dan. That was the club overall. They ended up being tied for most goals conceded in the league last year with 43. A couple of those were Dan's own goals, and I don't expect that from him going into Forge. And it's not a difference of systems or anything like that. Just sometimes it's not your day, and it kind of goes that way. And speaking to Dan last year, he kind of summed up his year as, what could go wrong did go wrong. And that, that's fair enough. That's sport, that's football.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting story. Like Felipe, we mentioned, didn't we? When you brought in TMG to Halifax, you think, wow, him and Dan Nimick, brilliant. Right, let's see how that goes. And obviously now, I guess they're having to rethink what they were doing. I guess I don't know how much they planned for this going on, but
yeah. Well, honestly, I think having TMG come in almost ensured that Dan Nimick would not be back with the Wanderers. Thinking about Dan and kind of how he walked onto the pitch pretty unheralded in 2023. He was a first-year pro. I don't know the context of his deal, but coming out of the last 2 years and kind of showing what he could do and how good he can be, even if that wasn't always present on the pitch. I expect he was probably looking for a bit of a pay raise. I don't think TMG left Pacific easily, right? I think that term and role were 2 really big things that were maybe promised or talked about for him moving coasts. And if you're promising TMG a starting spot, or maybe not promising a starting spot, but giving him all of the tools and leeway to be that main man on Halifax's back line, that really does push Nimick out, because that was kind of his role. So maybe the writing was on the wall back before Christmas when we found out that TMG signed, but it's now officially official that he's staying in the CPL, but he's going to be swapping blue for orange.
Yeah. I mean, I remember my reaction was just shock, of course, but also for Forge, you lose. They obviously let a lot of players go. Methuselah, Duncan, Dominic Samuel, both of the 9s, as I mentioned. Another one that we'll talk about in a little bit as well in the midfield. But when you're looking at somebody to replace someone at center back, I mean, Dan Nimick is one of the best options that you have in the league. And the fact that they got him, and now we could see Dan Nimick starting beside Ashinoni Johnson or Malik Oluwabi-Belowu. Maybe finally Ashinoni Johnson will finally be able to go back into midfield, and then have Oluwabi-Belowu and Dan Nimick take center back, and Johnson can finally go and play in where he actually liked to play in the midfield. But either way, the options that the Forge has with him is quite just incredible. And the fact that they were able to also keep a lot of players, they were able to extend the loan of Daniel Parra, who was a huge player for Forge, especially in the first half of the season. That kind of ban that he got really kind of derailed them right towards the end of the season after they won the season title. So he'll be a key player, I'm assuming, once again. Obviously, re-signing Kyle Becker and Tristan Borges no-brainers there, but it's always great to see them stay on. Northern Tribune reported that might potentially a return of Rezart Rama coming in on loan after Malcolm Duncan leaves, probably a like-for-like replacement there. And I was personally a big fan of Rama when he was at Forge two seasons ago, so might be a nice pickup. But like all in all, Forge are making what seemingly looks like the right moves, right? And incomings and then outgoings. But as always with Forge, it can't always be, smooth waters. There always has to be little things here and there with Forge that keep them in the mind of people with some of the ways that they like to go about things, or it just tends to go that way. And so, two big news in terms of outgoings and in terms of drama. Obviously, shock news was Sandra Hojabrpour leaving Forge FC. Everyone expected him to resign and everything, but they did announce, as with everybody else that I mentioned earlier, that he was going to leave. And Josh, perfect timing, you reported earlier today, at the day of recording, that he was actually training with Orlando City, the MLS club, and how the funny coincidence is that Forge are due to play against Orlando City in just a few days and less than a week. So I'm curious to see how that's going to go with if they do sign Hojabrpour. I mean, he is quality. He is still relatively young. Is he MLS quality as someone that can go and play with Orlando City? I think that remains to be seen. He's obviously a very, very high quality player in the CPL. Can he make that jump? I feel like, if he backs himself to be able to do that, um, I don't see why not. I'd love for him to get that chance, and just funny that how life works that way. But Hojabrpour, huge loss. Mike, do you think that it was something that Forge willingly let him, maybe because the opportunity was there to train with MLS clubs, or do you think that it was some sort of like Hojabrpour forced their hands as he didn't want to resign because he wanted to take that next step?
I think that continual like high level and improvement each year. Like he's 25, like you say, he's not old, but he's getting to that point where you need to say, right, if I am going to make that step up, probably a good time now. Like my stock's as high as it will possibly be. Orlando's an interesting one. I don't know if they're still retaining like Arujo and Wilder Cartagena, like quite young international players. That's going to be very hard to dislodge from that team. So we'll see how he feels in that. Probably looking at the second team, obviously the MLS Next Pro side and things like that, see how that might start, like how he fit in as a whole squad basis player in that team. But it's an interesting pick, but I think he's got the qualities, he's got to go for it. Like he's really like footballers are ambitious. Like you don't become a pro athlete without being ambitious, and now's the time to go for it. He's got the quality to keep improving and go into bigger leagues. It's making that right decision, isn't it, I guess?
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like with Hojabrpour making that step to MLS, it feels like the right decision. Obviously, hindsight in the future will let us know whether it is or whether it is not. But I think for right now, at the stage of his career, it's a good move. And it seems to be on the surface. I don't know, Josh, if you have any insider info that it was amicable, the break between Hojabrpour and Forge. At least nothing reported to be any tension or anything. It seems like they, whether they wanted to or not, allowed him to go and move on to new things, and I guess training with Orlando, and I guess they'll be reunited quite quickly. The same can't really be said for another player, which I feel like I'd love to hear both of your takes on, because this is the big one, of course, and that is Benny Banga drama. When Forge announced a lot of their updates on Instagram specifically, Benny Banga came through and on his own personal story released that he had actually terminated. I was going to say mutually. I don't think it's mutually, but terminated his contract on January 6th because of, quote, bad faith in the club, and wished his teammates luck, but he said he was no longer with the club, and he did not travel with Forge to their preseason training camp. But Forge have not released anything, and people apparently close to the club maintain that he is under contract. So another bit of a sticky situation, reminded me a lot of the Tristan Henry situation that happened in last off season. So, Josh, starting with you, what do you make of this kind of drama between Baribanga and Forge? Should we compare it to what happened with Tristan Henry? I know there's some differences in the context of it, but is it sort of the same issues once again of Forge maybe not going about the whole contract situation in the best way with some of the star players?
See, that's hard for me to say. Obviously, we aren't privy to all the information, but as the Northern Tribune reported, John Jack, who does incredible work, that this is a player who has decided not to report to camp and then opted to take to social media to make their position known. That's not the way to get a deal done. And whatever was said between them, there's literally a spot on the standard player contract, as I understand it, that says like verbal agreements do not stand. And when you really boil it down to brass tacks, Baribanga had a contract option that was exercised, and the club and league have confirmed that he is still under contract. So him saying that it's just cause, I don't think, and I don't believe he has any ground to stand on. Whether things again were said and promises made, that's another thing. But at this time, even though Baribanga has sought out legal expertise, I think it's pretty one-sided in terms of the club's favor, right? So they exercised the contract option, which they have the ability to do, and he decided not to report to camp and then took to social media as well. So there's definitely, this is 2 years in a row now where we've seen this same kind of drama play out. So, where there's smoke, there's fire. And that speaks to maybe a pattern, but it's how it came out and how the two parties were interacting with each other that we don't have all the information from my understanding.
Yeah, and I think obviously with cases like this, that's the biggest thing, is that we don't want to make a mountain out of a molehill and start speculating about what was said, what wasn't said when we weren't involved, right? But we can discuss what has been reported from John. And so expanding on the whole bad faith thing, it was reported that where that stemmed from was that there was a verbal agreement, and that's the key thing, a verbal agreement, not contractual agreement, verbal agreement, that Forge would sell Baribanga should an offer come in at a reasonable price, and they allegedly named what that price was. But that multiple offers had come in the last 6 months that had met that original price, but that Forge had been, quote, moving the goalposts and almost getting to, I think, what was in the article, double of what the original verbal agreement was. Now, Baribanga thinks that is in bad faith because he feels like he should be allowed to leave should a big offer comes in. Apparently, the offer was not going to be a record-breaking amount, but still likely substantial for a CPL club. And so due to that, there's where this kind of conflict sort of stems from. Mike, when we're dealing with kind of issues like this, when it comes to price tags and verbal agreements, not having it in writing, is it going against the grain to say that maybe Baribanga should just continue, even though the verbal agreements were made because it wasn't in writing? Or should maybe people side with the player because he was promised something verbally and there's supposed to be good faith between player and club?
I don't think you need to look particularly far to see that verbal agreements means nothing. Like poor old Harry Kane got stuck at Tottenham for another year. So many Manga's got to see what, but like a verbal agreement means absolutely nothing. So yeah, if you want something, if you need it, get it in writing. Like it's the same in any industry. From the Forges side, though, like every time this happens, like year on year, it's that sort of marketing of it doesn't matter what they're saying, as long as everyone's talking about us, we're happy.
Very true.
I would say it's one of those things where, Forge may be in the right legally as it relates to the contract, but obviously there's a disconnect between players and management if this continues to happen. Again, we've seen this twice. The question that always pops to my mind, and I'm sure everyone else, is okay, what stories have we not heard?
Yeah.
Not that I have anything, but again, it speaks to, obviously there's something happening for a player to take to social media to contest his contract. So food for thought.
Exactly.
Yeah. They might finish sixth this year. It'll be great.
Maybe. Oh, have we not learned, Mike? Have we not learned?
Yeah, so I think Forge's downfall has been predicted a few times, and yet they always seem to have a trophy at the end of the year.
Yeah,
that's what I mean. You can never, ever, ever bet against them, no matter what the situation looks like. I think we just have to learn our lesson. Learn our lesson there. We'll leave the Forge stuff for now. We'll leave it there. As more information comes on, we'll obviously discuss it in future episodes. But let's move on to the other 905 team in York United, because they've also been doing a bit of business themselves. Obviously, as we mentioned with Forge, they have lost Brian Wright and Mo Babuli to their 905 rivals. It was also reported earlier today that Juan Cordova, even though he did get his contract extended, actually was allowed to leave to go to Chile. I don't think there's been a transfer fee reported about that, but he has gone back to Chile to play. So a big loss for York United there, because he was such an influential player for them last season. He loved to score a couple bangers, but more than anything, like a player that we thought was a fullback got pushed into midfield and became one of the best midfields in the league, and was a stellar player under then coach of York United, Benjamin Mora. So a big shoes to fill there for the players coming in to York United. But to be fair to York United, they've had a pretty decent acquisition sheet so far as well. They've signed Rally Ferrazzo from Halifax. They signed Gabby Bitar from Vancouver FC, Stephen Yates, and Adonijah Reed from Pacific, and they just recently signed Luke Singh from Toronto FC on a permanent basis after he was on loan to Ottawa. So a lot of CPL proven players that have shown signs of being good players at this league and level. I mean, Gabby Bitar on his day was one of the best 10s. Riley Ferrazzo had, Josh can surely attest, some really good periods for their Wanderers. Stephen Yates and Adonijah Reed have had their moments and were key pieces for James Merriman as well in the last few years. And Luke Singh, obviously had to play second fiddle to some big center backs like Amir Didic in the last season, but still was able to hold his own. So, like, these are good signings. Of course, they re-signed Frank Stirring as well as the center back. So, like, looking at it all so far from York United, yes, they might have lost their top goal scorer, two of their most important players as well, in Babul and Cordova, but it doesn't feel like they've weakened at this point. It looks like, at least from within the league, they've done pretty well for themselves so far this offseason. I don't know if you have the same thoughts, Mike.
Yeah, I'm interested to see what you guys think. Like, especially both of you obviously seen Ferrazzo and Bitar a lot in person over the years. And Yates, I thought he's really got something that he just needs to unleash. He's got qualities. It could be fantastic. But the four of them, including Adonijah Reed, there's four players that have got something to prove. I think there are a few players that maybe this year it's not gone quite as they hoped it would. I think for all four of them, like for different reasons for each. And I think York are bringing that sort of there's all that. Let's get the boys from the GTA back, like Vancouver tried getting everyone back in, and let's do this as a group. Like, let's not go off and find. Eustachio's bringing in players that he knows. Like, let's build this identity of right, we're fighting for something here. That's the impression I'm getting from this team.
What I would add to that is more so just speaking to Batar and Ferrazzo's players. They're players that have a really good engine and work ethic. Oftentimes Batar was the one of the only players, I'd argue, really trying to create things for Vancouver FC. I rate him quite highly, and then for Ferrazzo for Halifax, he had the misfortune of being signed at the same time that Weston Mateo was moved to left back and Zach Fernandez was the established right back. So it was really hard for him to kind of carve out minutes. So to your point, Mike, both of them are guys who have something to prove and, in my opinion, have a good engine. I'm not as familiar with Yates and Reed. I've watched them, but I don't know their games as well. What I'm really curious to see is how Luke Singh's going to adjust. Obviously, again, he was kind of a bigger fish coming from TFC to Atletico Ottawa over the last number of years. But consistently we kind of saw him lose his spot, especially down the stretch last year, where he just didn't seem to have the same hunger as maybe someone like Tier Walker. Or the quality, as you mentioned, to someone like Amir Didic. So again, he's an Ontario guy, from my understanding, who's going to be looking to reestablish himself. Right, this is his chance to free from TFC and to kind of show who he is and put in an off season of hard work and maybe earn a big role with York United. One of the things I think it's important to remember is that Noah Batney has not re-signed with York at this time, and they ran a 3 center backs for much of last year. So there, to me, from my way of thinking, there's a potential job for Singh to really grab hold of and hold on to as a starter. It'll just be curious to see if he can do that under Eustachio's guidance.
Yeah, that's very true, and that's a great point about Noah Batna, because we have talked at length in the last couple of years how much of a prospect and talent that he is, and yeah, you're correct. He has not signed a new contract, so he might be on the move as well in the coming week. So I think that does open up the space for Luke Singh to kind of prove himself once more, and maybe now in a team that isn't as full of stars as Ottawa was last season can kind of establish himself in that defensive position there. But I think, yeah, overall, York United so far, like you mentioned there, Josh, like Ferrazzo, Batar, they work really hard. I feel like Yates as well in Pacific, it was more of like the box to box, and he loved to run around in the midfield and just connect with the players. Sometimes was put in positions where he was the ball winner when he wasn't the best, compared to Sain, to try to be the 10 or the attacking force when he wasn't as good as like Aparicio was previously for Pacific. So I'm hoping that he gets exactly the role that he needs at York United, and I'm really interested to see how Eustachio kind of places him in that. And the same sort of goes with Adonijah Reed. He's not really a striker, but he was put in the striker positions. Hopefully he can kind of play in that second striker, kind of 10 center forward role that he loves to do so much. And he also is another player that just loves to run around as well, and is very, very dynamic. So I feel like so far the signings for York United have been following a kind of set pattern, and it makes me excited to see what Eustachio is going to cook up with York in the season to come.
Mm-hmm.
But let's move on now to the Halifax Wanderers, since Josh is here. Not that much business done from the Wanderers compared to the last two teams that we discussed. Obviously, TMG was reported and done before the new year, so we won't spend talking about that. We already know how great of a signing that is. We knew that Filion wasn't coming back, Jan Filion, and we were curious about who was going to replace him. Now we have an answer, and that is Ryan Yesley has come in for Jan Filion at the Halifax Wanderers. And this is a move that makes me very happy, because I'm a big fan of Ryan Yesley. I really liked him a lot at Valor. He got my vote for goalkeeper of the year in 2023. I was really sad that he barely featured at all for Ottawa. Obviously, Nate Ingham was a superb keeper and was keeping him out. But I feel like now Yesley's going to a team that he can really establish himself as the number one. He comes in with, I can only assume, the expectation of being the big man between the sticks and number one. And what he showed with Valor 2 seasons ago, his shot stopping ability and everything, I can only imagine that Halifax fans are excited by this signing. And I'm curious for you, Josh, do you see this as an upgrade on Yan Fillion? I know a lot of people, I think maybe wrongly, were harsh on Fillion in the last couple of years, and maybe he was better. He was a bit more underrated than people gave him credit for. But for you, knowing closely Fillion, and also seeing Yesley in the last couple of years, do you think it's an upgrade on the position?
Time will tell, won't it?
Mm.
It's one of those things where, Fillion had the pedigree. Of course, he had played over in Europe for a number of years. And with how young the Wanderers squad was, especially in 2023, several of the players, that was their first professional season. Having a seasoned voice at the back end like Fillion to really organize the lines, to help get the center backs comfortable was really important. It's hard to push a value or measure on what his steadiness did for them. At the same token, in 2024, the wheels fell off her, and things didn't go as everyone would have hoped. So I don't know about an upgrade, but he definitely brings a different profile. Yesley to me is more athletic. He's also huge. He's
Absolutely.
6'8", if I remember correctly. So I'm 6'6", and I would have to look up to him. So again, he's also younger as well. So maybe a bit more dynamic. But he's also got some work to do. One of the reasons, well, not one of the reasons, but Fillion, for example, he was quite good with his feet. He was comfortable going long with the ball. He was comfortable coming out to receive it, relieve pressure, things like that. And as a younger keeper, Yesley's 24. That's something he can still work on as well. So he, let's be honest, he lost the goaltending duel in Atletico Ottawa, and he ended up being in the backup. I don't think that was anyone's plan necessarily, but Nate Ingham showed his quality and won out. So this is another shot for Yesley to establish himself and say, hey, not only can I be a starting keeper as he was in Valor, but also a starting keeper for a club that is contending for the playoffs. And if Patrice Geyser has his way, also trophies. So it'll be very curious to see what happens. I do think we can't talk about the goalkeeping situation without talking about Aiden Rushness. Obviously, he only had 4 matches last year, but something to consider is he's no longer U21 eligible, and the club decided that they wanted to keep him around. If that's the case, I expect that we'll maybe see more of him than we did last year.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. That was what I was going to ask the two of you. Like, it's not Yesley's move to Ottawa that didn't go to plan, I don't think, for him whatsoever. The fact that he's moved so quickly again, and like you say, if Rushness isn't U21 eligible anymore, like he's going into another job again. Like for him, like after such a good season with Valor, like he's now going into 2 seasons where he's competing again for a spot rather than being guaranteed one. It's a strange position for a young goalie.
That's a very good point, Mike. It's the table's been completely reset the same for him, except now he's the older guy with more experience, which is not the position he had previously been in.
Yeah.
So it's going to be really interesting to see how he responds. As you kind of alluded to there, Felipe, the expectation is that he will be the starting keeper. I've seen some articles and interviews where he's kind of talked about it. But at the end of the day, whoever's stopping the ball is the guy who's going to end up between the sticks.
Yeah.
And that's what he's got to do. Training camp starts here in 2 weeks, roughly. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how that battle plays out between Yesley and Rushness.
Yeah. And it'll be a good one. I always think competition is good because it pushes players to play at their best. I just hope that Yesley maybe understands the task ahead of him and now has learned the lessons from what happened with Ottawa, and maybe applies himself a little bit more to really go at that position with Rushness. But that was the big signing from Halifax, really. Big other news as well is the re-signed of Lorenzo Caligari. That one was a huge question mark for a lot of people. We love Caligari here with Coast to Coast. We always say he's one of the sexiest players on the ball in the league. And so we're so happy to have him stay in the league and have another season of Caligari, and I feel like with a player like Lorenzo, you kind of have to savor every moment that you have with him. And I feel like we are really lucky that he's going to stick around for a third season. I remember Mike and I were like, I don't think he's going to last even a full season. He was that good, but it seems that he really likes it in Halifax and really likes being with the team. Obviously, you can maybe elaborate more on it, but like Caligari and Halifax, what seemed to be like a fever dream pairing, now is sort of like an established connection.
You completely nailed it right there, Felipe. It's one of those things where when everyone saw his resume and that he was coming over to the CPL, everyone raised an eyebrow. But it's worked out better than I think anyone could have imagined it. When you hear of a player who came up through PSG's academy and played with Kylian Mbappe for the France youth teams, for him to be here, you expect him almost to come in with airs or a big ego. But that's not the case at all. He's really endeared himself to not only his teammates, but also the coaching staff and the fans. And for him to come back was not a guarantee. It was 50-50 whether he was going to return to Europe, which of course is his family's in France, or stay in the CPL. My understanding was if he was going to come back to the CPL, pretty well the only spot he was going to go to was the Wanderers. Yeah. And after taking, a couple months to make that decision, he decided to re-up for 2 seasons, which I think is a coup unto itself. So Caligari and Patrice Geyser's system go hand in hand. He likes to touch the ball. He likes to move it around. He likes to distribute. He likes to be on the front foot and be dictating play. And that's exactly how Patrice likes to play. So I think it's kind of the perfect marriage. It just remains to be seen, can they get the results when they have, as I would argue, probably the most, between him and Morelli, talented player that's ever put on a Wanderers shirt on the team sheet. You've got to accomplish something. They tried last year and it didn't work. And I think while he's here, we're going to see Halifax go all in to try and push for the club's first trophy.
Yeah. Yeah, and I feel like that must have been something that was discussed in the negotiations of he wants to push to be in those top few positions again and challenge for the Shield and go far into the playoffs. So I'm assuming that promises were made to him because you don't get raised through the PSG academy and with the France on their youth teams without a winner's mentality. And I'm sure he's wanting to finally win with the Halifax. So yeah, I would be kind of surprised if they have another season like they did last season, if he does stick around for that second year or if he pushes to maybe move on somewhere else. But hopefully we do get to see him for the full 2 seasons because I love watching that man play. So
I was about to say, One Soccer put out a graphic the other day calling him the CPL's Busquets, and I thought you may have coined that, Mike, way like one of your way back in 2023. But I find it very true, right? He kind of does it all in the midfield, and he's the metronome. So again, I'm just personally, because I cover the club, it's gonna be nice watching him play because
you're lucky.
there's probably once a match where he just does a little flick or a curl or something where you kind of go like, wow, that was cool to see. So
he's a delight. Like
he's just that kind of player. And then lastly, we did get another signing, a lesser known signing for Halifax, and that was in Isaiah Johnston. I'll be honest, don't really know much about him because I don't watch much of the USL, knowing that he came from Loudoun United, where he played with another ex-CPL player in Kwame Aua from Forge. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit for like a minute or two about who Isaiah Johnston is and what he brings to Halifax.
Yeah, I had the privilege to speak to a couple of his ex-coaches, actually. So I called up Dean Morley, who is the head coach of Cape Breton University, where he attended for varsity sports. And I also spoke to his USL head coach at Loudoun United. And together, they painted the profile of a player who has grown a lot since he first was drafted and played for York United in the 2020 season, if memory serves. He's developed from previously he was more of a CDM, kind of sits back, athletic, but raw in his passing and his vision. And over the last number of years, the two of them being spent in the United States, first in MLS Next Pro and then also in the USL. He's rounded out as a box-to-box midfielder and kind of combined his athleticism, which he's always had, and has developed his ability to pass, break lines, and really add that offensive flair to his game. So I was similar to you, Felipe. I didn't really remember too much about his time with York United, but just from again talking to his coaches, it sounds like he's going to maybe fill a gap that Halifax had after selling Callum Watson on. Kind of almost that English style or midfielder who crashes the box and he's got an engine that never quits. So it'll be interesting to see where he plays in Patrice's system, but it sounds like he's going to be a number 8. And again, the Wanderers really liked him because they paid a fee. There was a transfer for them to actually be able to get him. So that speaks to, again, their commitment to kind of turning things around this year.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, in this league, to pay a transfer, that means you really want that player.
Yeah.
You really do. So I'm excited to see what he brings for Halifax in this upcoming season. But now we're going to go to the opposite coast, and we're going to talk about Pacific FC. They've done a little bit of business so far, but the little bit has been quite big as well, because we did get to see a return this time for another return in the CPL, and it's Caden Chung, Pacific FC's first ever signing, coming back to the island after spending a couple years with arch rivals Vancouver FC. Obviously a big surprise, I know for me. Initially, when they did not resign Caden Chung, it was a big surprise, and I was very curious to see what his next move was. Should have anticipated that he would just want to stay in BC. Once you live in BC, who wants to leave BC? So he just wanted to stay in BC and go this time back to the island, and now is back with Pacific FC and had a bit of an injury hit time with Vancouver FC. Unfortunately, I don't think we ever really got to see the best of Caden Chung out in Langley. So hopefully he gets to go back to his very best, the Caden Chung that we saw in that 2021 season and beyond. Hopefully we get to see Caden Chung kind of reach those heights again. But as well, Pacific FC have signed Aiden Daniels from Halifax, another pretty decent snag there from Pacific, and also signing Ronan Kratz internationally, a German winger. I think for me, the biggest thing with Pacific, no new number 9. Still no one to replace Riyad Moore. It's a position, Mike, that we've talked about for a little while that they haven't replaced. Really, Alejandro Diaz since he left all those years ago, and they've been struggling to find consistent goal scorers. I mean, Ronan Krat hopefully does better than some of the other players that have come in, wingers. That is a Nata. We have to wait a long time for him to find the back of the net. Hopefully he gets a little bit quicker. But is it concerning at this point, or because there's still time, fans should be concerned that there's still no star striker coming in?
Well, they've only got 11 outfield players signed, I think, at the moment still. So it's very early days in Pacific. It's exciting to see Caden Chung because we still don't know. The two of you might know better, but I mean, Kunle Dadaluke, I'm not sure where he's at. Things like that.
He's not coming back.
Yeah, so it's vital to get someone in that position. Obviously, you've got George Mukambiwa, but he's sort of that cover for both sides, isn't he? So something had to come in. I think it's quite exciting seeing Aiden Daniels get a chance, I think, over in Pacific, because they had nobody in that with that ability. Like Stephen Yates was forced into that role at times. He didn't have that, he doesn't have that number 10 part side to his game. And then a number of players are rotated round. They just had workhorses in the middle, not that quality to get it into a forward. So it's good that he's got the opportunity. But like you say, centre forward still very much needed in this team. They've got some they've got the basic parts. Like I say, it's just such a small squad at the moment. There's a lot of work that needs to go into this roster to make sure that they know what they're doing as well as they're prepared.
What? Obviously, it's not been announced yet, but I have it on several sources that Marco Bustos is also going to make his return to Pacific.
Oh, was it Pacific? Okay.
Yeah, so I think just kind of remembering how well him and Caden Chung connected on the right side of the pitch a number of years ago, I think having that built-in chemistry is going to be very good for them. Again, that hasn't been announced by the club yet, but it's almost a bit of a reunion tour for them, getting the band back together with two players who again had a lot of success there. Mixed bag leaving Vancouver Island. For various reasons for each of those players, and now as I've reported, we'll both be back there again. So that is a help. But as you said, Mike, training camps are starting soon. Most players are showing up in their respective cities at the beginning of February. So either they've got a whole lot of signings they haven't shared with us, or they're busily working the phones trying to find players.
Yeah. Hopefully for them, it's the former and not the latter, but content is content. So I guess we won't complain either way. But now let's move on to talking about the Capital City Club in Atletico Ottawa. Our biggest news from them isn't even in a player, I would say, but in a new coach. We have Diego Mejia coming in as the replacement for Cargo, and the reception to this coach has been pretty good from what I've seen before. We obviously talked about are they going to go Spanish? Or going to use their connections again and stuff like that? But no, they've gone to Mexico, and they've gotten the former Juarez coach, who also was an assistant there and pretty much spent all of his coaching career at that club. Didn't have a great season last season, and was inevitably let go, but seems to be coming in with a lot of new energy and seems to be a coach that knows how to deal with some big personalities, as there always are in Mexican soccer. So might be the perfect fit for Atletico Ottawa. Time will obviously tell. He uses Mexican connections to get their first big signing in veteran midfielder Juan Castro from Atlético San Luis, who was their record appearance holder, so a legend at Atlético San Luis. So clearly a player that knows the professional game very, very well and knows, he's been around the block a few times when dealing with different kinds of scenarios in the game. So probably a really good signing for them as well. Lastly, biggest news in terms of outgoing is, of course, Mateo De Brienne going to Sweden to the team Gais. I don't know if it's you say it as a word or an acronym, GAIS. No, forgive me, I don't know Swedish.
It sounded good though.
Yeah.
Gais. Okay.
You should have gone with it. Like you were confident.
Yeah.
Like I was buying it.
So you were buying. Okay.
Delivery is everything, man. Delivery is everything.
Right. Okay. So we'll scratch that, guys. That's what it is. That's what it is. But huge move. Obviously, fantastic for Mateo De Brienne, who has been a great talent in the last couple of years in the CPL. It's another Canadian going to Europe, getting his chance, and I feel like that's the whole point of the league, right? So to develop Canadian talent and build them up so they can move on to the next big thing. Overall, on Atletico Ottawa with the coach, Juan Castro and De Brienne, what are our thoughts on their offseason so far? Josh, if you want, you can start.
I was going to say the CPL continues to have that Mexican flair added to it. We saw it last year with York United and several clubs going down south for their camp. Of course, Atletico Ottawa went down to hang out with Atletico San Luis. And I don't think it's, a coincidence that we're having several players reported to potentially be headed to the capital city now. Another thing I wanted to say is, of course, they have the new head coach, but they also have a new CEO. Again, with both are young, both have Mexican roots. And it's an opportunity for a bit of a clean slate. Carlos Gonzalez, from what I had heard, had essentially lost the room by the time things ended with his tenure with that club. So to have a new younger coach in, no, not that Gonzalez was by any means, but to have a new younger coach come in new ideas, new philosophies. This is a bit of a transition year for the club, but that also gives them an opportunity to reset their standards and what they're looking to be. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see several more San Luis players end up being announced over the next couple weeks.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, when you have those connections, and we saw with York United in the same way, when you have those connections, it only makes sense to use them. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw more Mexican players instead of Spanish players making the jump to Atletico Ottawa in the coming weeks. But Mike, obviously Mateo de Brienne, former Valor boy for you. How nice is it to see him move on to bigger and better things over in Europe?
Yeah, I mean, it's so important. Like, we've seen players go across, and some are obviously coming back and have come back already. And it's yeah, it's still early days. Like, and to be able to get these players going across, at some point, one of them's going to actually hit. Hopefully for Mateo de Brienne, it's him. Like, and we see him like doing well in a new country and like making a full career of it. He's an incredibly athletic player, which I think is going to help. Like, that as a basic is going to give him that opportunity to go, and hopefully like he's got that mentality to keep growing and learning in the club and improve in the league in Sweden. It's going to be exciting to see. Hopefully it really works for him.
I have big hopes for him. Obviously, Canadian men's national team is probably his goal, and seeing what happened with Kwasi Poku as well, getting his nod, it's hopefully something that's on the horizon for Mateo de Brienne, and that's something that we all, I think, want to see happen. More CPL or former CPL players making it into the Canadian men's national team.
Well, I was just about to say I had a chance to speak with Jesse Marsh on Tuesday. He was in Halifax for his coaching workshops that I'll be doing across the country, and that's a question that he was asked. What role does the CPL play in helping to complement the Canadian men's national team? And he spoke very highly of the league. He also revealed that he's been spending, at least while he was in Halifax, time with Wanderers head coach Patrice Geyser. They went around the city together. They talked about players. They talked about Wanderers players. They talked about other players in the league. And he seems very earnest to learn more and kind of incorporate that into the cycle, which I don't think is something we could. Maybe there wasn't as much of a concerted effort as Jesse Marsh seems to be making. So I think that bodes very well for Mateo de Brienne.
Yeah. For sure. And for all CPL players, I mean, that's why he was there in the first place. So I'm glad that the men's national team coach and the CPL are getting closer and closer in that. And hopefully we get a couple of other CPL names in rosters to come as the World Cup approaches. But now, speaking of former Valor, let's talk about Valor itself, Mike. They've done some business as well, actually. They signed Tamaras from York United. Obviously, they re-signed their coach, Phil Dos Santos. Mixed reviews, maybe, on that one, but I'll let you talk about that in a bit.
I think that's the definition of a mixed review. Phil Dos Santos came recently.
Very true. Very, very true. But in terms of players, they did get Rocco Romeo back into the club after he was let go from Vancouver FC. Another big shock exit from the Vancouver side. And they also signed Chris Twardek, the right winger, right back, right midfielder, right player of Atletico Ottawa. Love to run up and down the right side of the pitch. And I think both really good signings. We saw that Valor needed defensive help last season. There was a couple of players that maybe weren't up to standard in the defense the first part of the season. Towards the end, they got better. I think Rocco Romeo comes in and has learned a lot from Vancouver FC. He was sort of thrust into leadership position at the very, very young age, but so was sort of forced to grow. I think he's become a lot better in these last couple of years, even though he is kind of mistake prone. I feel like he's learned a lot from the mistakes that he's made. I think is going to be a solid signing for Valor there. And Chris Twardek, I mean, he's exactly, I think, what Valor needed. Somebody else to be on the other wing aside from Temi Adzonoglu that can make stuff happen. A really good foil for Temi there. And Valor attack to make it more two-pronged rather than having to solely rely on the left side for that creativity and that bite. Obviously, Josh, as you were telling us before, that may not happen because of news on Temi and potential courting from MLS clubs. You know, the rumors that are going around. But overall, Mike, like so far, at least in these sort of three signings, it looks like Valor are making the right moves. Do you feel like it's different from last season when they were signing all of the kind of misfits that were going around in the league and trying to throw a team together through them?
Yeah, I think so. Obviously, I don't think they trusted Marissa Ramwa to dislodge Viscosi, who was error prone to entertaining at times. So Imaras is like, I think he's a slightly better backup who will push him a little bit more. And if those calamities continue, I mean, great shot stopper at times, but calamities are going to continue. At least they've got that a little bit more of a backup that they might favour. I think Twadek's come across because he's going to get that opportunity in the midfield more. Roberto Alacon, I thought was really good last year, like coming across from Calgary, that is good right back. But yeah, they needed something extra, like in Twadek's good, hard-working player in there. It just adds a little bit to it. They haven't got a huge amount of other players. Obviously, Kean Williams is still in there. We didn't get to see it all really last year. But a lot of their players are sort of central players, and I think they'll continue with that 4-4-2. And Twadek's what you want as a right winger. I think in that with Alacon, that really improves that side. I think so. It'll be interesting to see where they go. But yeah, I mean, Rocco Romeo's got that little bit of chance. Vacineri was decent, a decent centre back. It's sad to see. I'm not sure the decisions on Tasmor Kudus. I really like him as a player, but he just seems to be getting let go year on year.
Yeah. I also really liked Tas. So hopefully, if he isn't coming back, he finds another home in the CPL. But yeah, I feel like they're making the right moves there. I mean, they did decline a couple of players that were sort of surprising or didn't re-sign. Obviously, Jordi Swivel, Tasmar Kudus, like we mentioned, Juan Pablo Sanchez, Loic Quemi, Abdul Binate. I know Binate was a player that you were.
I kept seeing bits where I think, oh, there's a player in there. Like there's someone that like the right person might be able to get something out of him.
I feel very similar about Loic Quemi as well. I mean, he's a futsal player, of course, and you could just see his skill on the ball. It didn't necessarily, turn into goal contributions, which is, I think where he ended up, not having his option exercised. But again, I think there's a player there.
Yeah. And then with the way Valor were, like Quemi just went at players. Like it's not going to go every time, but every time he's going to take a player on, and it was fun to watch. Like so, yeah. Good luck to him with his next move.
Yeah. But moving swiftly along now to the second last team that we're going to talk about, Vancouver FC. And these last two teams were purposely chosen because neither of them have made any signings. All the news around them is about either players that they sold or let go or players that they might have re-signed. Starting with Vancouver FC, no new signings, as I mentioned, at all, but they did lose a lot of players. We already talked about Caden Chung going to Pacific, Rocco Romeo going to Valor, Gabby Batar going to York United. They even let go of players like Olivier Romans and Renan Garcia, who Garcia up there in age, I guess is more understandable. Romans, I thought was pretty decent for them, kind of surprised, but they let a lot of players go, which I am sort of taking it as like, okay, last year didn't work. I think Afshin Gapi needs more players that have a bit more grit, a bit more determination. I think he's learned his lessons about maybe getting too many young players or not established players, and feels
maybe
like
a few that he's pissed off as well.
Yeah, maybe a few that he has.
I think you hit that, Mike.
Yeah, some bad relationships. Yes, a lot of noise on that front. That maybe better we don't comment on. I know there are a lot of people that have heard a lot of things about what's going on at Willoughby and some unhappy campers there. Seems that maybe a lot of the players that left were because of that. But just looking at on the pitch stuff, it seems like they're looking now to bring in players that maybe fit the mold better for Afshin Gopi, whatever that mold may look like. But the big news with Vancouver FC is obviously the two players that are leaving, or potentially leaving, let's say. And they're both young players. First one up, of course, probably one of the biggest news in the CPL across the league in terms of a sale is obviously Grady McDonald, reportedly being sold to Club Bruges' second team club NXT. No, that has nothing to do with the wrestling company. But for nearly 350K, really it's 300K with I think 30 odd grand going to the agent with those pesky agent fees. But still a substantial sale for the CPL club of an extremely just vibrant talent that is Grady McDonald. I got to see him and get to know him a bit more in this past year. I knew of him before through the Whitecaps. He was the jewel in the Whitecaps Academy for a while. It seems like that for Grady McDonald, this was the natural next step. And even at the end of season conference, Rob Friend was almost saying that they were fielding offers from big teams to Grady McDonald as almost like a badge of honor, like it was a privilege to be able to sell him to these big teams because he knew like how much of a talent Grady McDonald was. And so for him to get this move to Belgium's second division, seems Belgian love the CPL, specifically second division. Tristan Borges, Kwasi Poku, now Grady McDonald potentially as well. The fact that Fabrizio Romano, the guy for scoops in all of the world, reported on it. It's a big deal. It is a big deal. And it's exactly aligning with the vision that Vancouver FC have of being that football factory that they were talking about at the end of last season, of taking, the best of BC and the best of Canada and trying to mold them into becoming potential superstars and then letting them go and flourish in the top league. So aside from, all of the drama that's going on behind the scenes, at least for what we see, this is exactly what Vancouver FC are sort of wanted. So for you two, Josh and Mike, and I guess starting Josh, what do you make of this deal for Grady McDonald, and like could this be a game-changing transfer for the CPL, such a young league for years to come?
Well, I think it kind of went exactly according to plan to Rob Friend and Vancouver FC. The fact that they were able to get McDonald from the Whitecap system and sign him to a multi-year contract, they were excited and knew the potential of this player the moment he put pen to paper. If you look at his CPL numbers, he hasn't really played that much. It was several hundred minutes this first year. But in that time, he's a young guy. He's been selected for Ireland's youth national team as well several times. He kind of delivered on his promise pretty quickly. Again, I know we'll talk about that here in a minute as well, but same sort of thing with James Cameron. He's a young player under contract that they were able to sign long term. And that's, as you've written about, Felipe, that's kind of the vision that they imagine for themselves. They're the in between for players to get them on to larger clubs and further along in their professional careers. Having said that, they also need to balance winning matches on the pitch, and it's a bit funny if you go back to their preseason. It seemed like Vancouver had done everything right. They signed a bunch of local players. They had these wicked kits. I mean, their cherry blossom kit, I think, is the best kit that was in the CPL this past year. Their marketing was great. Like they hit every note, and then it just, they had 4 or 5 good matches to start the year and just fell apart. So I think it's great that they were able to sell on McDonald and get some money for him. If James Cameron is able to be sold as well, again, that's another feather in their cap to to recruit players to come to them saying, hey, we're open to selling you on if you prove yourself. This is a great spot to do it. And I think that's a good reputation to have. However, you also have to compete. They're the youngest club in the league right now. They need exciting football. They need to win matches to keep the crowds there. And, it'll be very interesting to see which players that Gottby brings in to kind of execute that vision, because it hasn't come to fruition yet.
Yeah.
No, I guess like you said, like obviously, like you were mentioning Felipe, like players, like how great is it for the league, like from a sale point of view. But I think also from that, the fact that he has come out of the Whitecaps Academy and just said, right, actually, like I want to make my steps in like a pro men's league. That gives the clubs around the country like the chance to then like CF Montreal and Toronto, as well as the Whitecaps academy players are looking at the league as like, right, okay, well, this could be an option for me. Like, I think that's one of the bigger things out of this sale, is that maybe a few more players might think that maybe there isn't just one. Let's wait to see if I get in the Whitecaps team. There's Montreal or Toronto's team. There's another 8 teams, hopefully more, coming up that could be an actual like career for me, and not just a let's see how it goes, and we're not 100% sure.
Yeah, exactly. I think that is exactly it. The fact that they were able to take a coveted player from the Whitecaps Academy, mold him into being able to compete at a men's level at such a young age, and then sell him on. I think, and it goes to show that again, Vancouver team, for the league, the CPL is a very, very viable option for young players that have a lot of potential and they're willing to put the work in to succeed and have that be the stepping stone to bigger and better things, compared to the MLS academies. They're great, but not everyone gets to shine in them, and a lot slip through the cracks. So I feel like this is another sale that makes the CPL go, listen, we're the real deal. We're the real deal for young players. Part of the reason why this league was made was for that, and it's coming to fruition, and so soon. With the league being so young, still only going on 7 years, I mean, it's fantastic for them, and hopefully, it's the beginning of even more of these stories of former academy players going to CPL teams, doing well, and then being sold on to Europe or any other big teams in the world. And as you mentioned, Josh, and I guess we'll briefly touch on it, James Cameron as well. He's a potential one that's leaving Vancouver FC. He is currently training with the Colorado Rapids, as was reported by AFTN, and it seems like it might be something that will come to fruition sooner rather than later, with him actually signing for them. We will see as further reports come out. But again, the same thing, another great move. And his story is almost even more like of an inspiring story, because he came out at the tryouts. He was, a VMSL kind of player, which is like the amateur league here in BC, like not even all that much with League One. Comes in, impresses, gets given that exceptional young talent contract, makes good on it, plays 2 years under Vancouver FC, and now is potentially going to play with MLS, or I guess their MLS Next Pro side, and get that opportunity. When just over 2 years ago, he was just an amateur player like so many other young players. So it's another success story that should really inspire and motivate a lot of young Canadian players, saying, if I just work hard, the CPL could be my shot to make it to that next level. What do you think, Mike?
Yeah, like my experiences, I think he's got the athleticism to do things, and he's learnt a lot. And as much as we can make fun of Ashton Gottby for some things, he has developed a few players who have really, really improved. For him, my experiences of James Cameron, obviously, came over to England last year and was trialing. There was speaking to one of the clubs that wanted to invite him for a trial there, because you can trial with 2 different teams while you're over in England. Another side asked him after he had his bit with Luton, and there was a lot of issues with his agent and his family. And they went back to Canada very quickly. A few of the clubs are just like, okay, well, we'll ignore it. We'll leave that then. I hope they're a little bit better prepared for what they're doing across if they're going across over into sort of MLS sides.
Yeah, for sure. Hopefully, if he does sign with Colorado, it's a nice, smooth transition without a lot of issues, administrative, bureaucratic problems that sometimes like to pop up in these things. But yeah, Vancouver. That's Vancouver FC. Quick little shout out mention to Ben Fisk retiring and full time going to work for the office staff. He was there actually for most of last season, helping out in the office staff. So nice for him to kind of see out his career. A CPL player that's been around for a while and has seen a lot in the last few years. So congratulations to him as he moves on to his next chapter. But let's finish off with Cavalry FC, with the playoff winners, because like Vancouver FC, they've done no business. They have re-signed a bunch of their talent, which is fantastic. It's a bunch. I'm not going to go through all the names, but they've signed pretty much everyone that you would expect them to re-sign. The only news, but also the biggest news for Cavalry is, of course, that Dan Klump has left the club. He will not be re-signing. We do not know quite yet where he's leaving. I don't know, Josh, if you have any updates on that, but we do know that he is not staying with Cavalry. I would be surprised to see him stay in the CPL. I do think he's trying to maybe find greener pastures somewhere else, but a big, big loss for Cavalry FC. And maybe to finish up, we could talk about maybe the impact that has on Cavalry and how they can sort of replace him. Starting with you, Josh.
Those are big shoes to fill. I mean, if you just look at his trophy cabinet over the last number of years, he's got the personal accolades and he's got the club accolades. So I don't really know, honestly, how you go about replacing someone of his quality. Some of the, like Dan Nimick would be the fella who would have jumped to my mind, but he's already been gobbled up by Forge. So what I will say, though, is that Cavalry, I think 21 of 23 players came back from last year's squad. Yeah. So they had almost no turnover. And when you have that cohesion and that consistency and familiarity, you can take a loss like Dan Klump and still be okay. They are doing their preseason right now, and they had a friendly against LAFC, and the score ended up being 1-1. And that's with Olivier Giroud on the pitch. So I don't think they're doing too bad, even without Klump. Obviously, that's a big loss. But they've got the depth and the talent to overcome that. I wouldn't be surprised if we find out that they have an extra center back signed sooner rather than later. But otherwise, the beat goes on for Tommy Wilden Jr. and his boys.
I think, trying not to frame it as everyone else will outside of Cavalry, but try not to frame it as you're replacing Dan Klomp's going to be vital. But Eric Kobza last year, he had such an incredible standout first season. I said I was worried about him in the early stages when they're in the CONCACAF. This could be a difficult year for him. Because everything went so well in that first year. He's had that time behind Klump. He's not played a huge amount of minutes compared to that first year. Hopefully this is a chance for him to say, right, okay, now I'm ready. Now I've found the level and the consistency to be able to compete. Because as a whole unit, they were performing incredibly well. Dan Klump's obviously a standout, but the whole defensive line played really well consistently. Carducci behind them, they know what they're doing week in, week out. They're so well organized. And I mean, like you mentioned, that LAFC, where we see the clips of Fraser Ed all mic'd up, they're having a great time. They seem very happy.
Good day to be alive.
Yeah, very, very true. I feel like Cavalry is similar to Forge, is a team that, if anyone is going to be able to deal with situations like this, it's a team like Cavalry or Forge. So while it is a massive hole, I do feel pretty confident that they'll be able to find, maybe not one player, but maybe a couple of players to replace Klump in the aggregate, both in attacking and a defensive sense, to use the baseball Moneyball terms. But I still feel like it will be different, obviously, not having Dan Klump there, but they'll be able to deal with that. And yeah, like you mentioned, Josh, I would be very surprised if they don't announce some defensive signings in the very near future.
The biggest thing I think for me from this is it's going to make a big impact on both Cavalry and Halifax as to who the first person not to draw at the beginning of the season will be.
Yeah. What will we do without 6 opening draws from one of them?
That 5-6 game drawing run that the two teams will have, not having Dan Klump might twist that slightly.
Very true. Very, very true. But that is it for the transfer recap episode. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episodes. We are so glad to be back. Make sure to follow us once again on all of our socials at Coast to Coast FC so you can give us your thoughts on the episodes. And once again, thank you, Josh, for coming in and using your expertise to discuss all of the transfer news that's transpired in the last month and a bit. Feel free to let the people know where they can find you, where they can hear you, and all that is about you.
100%. People can follow me on Blue Sky at Josh RJ Healey. You can also find my work at my blog, wandersnotebook.ca. And increasingly, I've got some bylines in One Soccer and stuff like that coming. So
perfect. I look forward to reading you on One Soccer. Everything that you got to say, obviously, one of the best in the game in the CPL right now. And hopefully we get to hear from you more in the coming weeks. But until next time, I'm Felipe and Mike.
I'm Mike Rice.
And I'm Josh Healey.
And this has been Coast to Coast FC, signing out.